Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. And we sent 4 Cup drivers packing last weekend. We are down to the final 8 with only 4 races to go in the NASCAR Cup season. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional sports bettor and my esteemed co-host on this very fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, we can say it with a smile on our face. See ya, Kyle Busch. I don't have to hear about the 8 car from now until 2024.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Kyle Busch. And certainly when it comes to the Roval, Talladega, and Texas, I am so glad you are behind us. Now we can actually make some money, I feel like, from a betting perspective. What a crazy way to have the playoffs play out, where you have 3 fairly consistent tracks and then you just have coin toss after coin toss. And, we did lose a big horse in Kyle Busch, but now we don't have to talk about it anymore. Happy to have some Kyle Larson and some Tyler Reddick still in the mix. So good tracks for those guys. But again, just so happy that nothing silly happened at the Roval, because it could have. If Kyle Busch wins that race, you now have Tyler Reddick, Kyle Larson, and Martin Truex Jr. One of those guys is out.
Yeah,
if Kyle Busch were to win.
And the way Truex was running, it probably would have been Truex on the outside.
It would have been Truex, yeah. And it only would have been by like 2 points. I was
going to say, it would have been significantly closer than it should have been. But, the bottom line is the 19's got to find some speed or he's going to get sent packing sooner rather than later. But just quick a refresher for all of our loyal Stay Green listeners. We'll divide this up into 3 stages. Stage 1, a quick Roval recap, although we're not going to learn a whole hell of a lot from the road course that we can apply going forward. Stage 2, as we've done all postseason long, a quick reset of the playoff odds. And Stage 3, drivers to watch, with special attention being paid to the 8 drivers that can have their names etched in NASCAR history. So as far as the Roval recap, shout out to AJ Allmendinger, a very emotional AJ Allmendinger when he gave his post-race interview. 41 years of age, ends up cashing a ticket at a price of 12-1. And to quote AJ, I hate crying right now, but it's a freaking Cup race, man. You don't know when it's ever going to happen again. But if there's a track where this man dominates in Xfinity or Cup, you can't bet against him at the Roval.
No, he was phenomenal. And the other thing, too, he was one of those guys that was able to undercut every stage or flip every stage. And you had to do that. There were other fast cars out there. I think that if you look at the 45 when he was out front and Tyler Reddick and when Chase Elliott was out front, Chase Elliott had almost a 6-second lead. Wasn't able to flip a stage, and that's it. Day's over. Tyler Reddick, probably the fastest car, wasn't able to flip a stage or didn't flip a stage, stayed on their plan, and then never, he was able to work his way back up to the top 5. But once you get in the top 5, those cars are so fast, it's really hard to separate yourself. So hats off to AJ. I'm a big Dinger fan. I love listening to the Dinger radio colleague. And Matt Colleague on there. You have Chris Rice and Dinger. He's so damn funny on the radio. Nothing is ever okay. He's Kyle Busch 2.0. And nothing is ever good, but he's so emotional. And I think that his comments maybe, kind of shows his hand a little bit that he might not be Cup racing next year. He might be back down in the Xfinity Series, which I think would be a bummer.
That was kind of the takeaway that I got, is that the fact that Colleague Racing hasn't made that commitment, that AJ, now being a father of a young son, may not want the full Cup grind that's part of it. Obviously, the Xfinity drivers still drive plenty, but you get a couple extra weeks off there that maybe he'll go down and try and win a championship before his career is all said and done, rather than being a full-time Cup Series driver. But purely speculation from the two of us. Obviously, we await an announcement to figure out exactly what direction they're going to go.
Yeah, I don't know. The silly season stuff is really tough for me just because you can't bet on it. So I don't want to spend too much time kind of thinking about it. But if AJ Allmendinger's in the Xfinity series, that's a guy from a betting perspective that is going to kind of hover in this 5.5 to 10-1 range that it can win anywhere. And so I like having him in that Xfinity series because right now we're seeing such heavy favorites between Nemechek and Allgaier that it's nice to have someone that if they do catch a setup, it doesn't matter what car they're in, they can go out there and win a race. So as long as we do see some AJ Allmendinger in the Cup Series with Kaulig, whether it's a limited schedule or not, I hope he does get to race some of these road courses. He's not really viable for a win when it comes to ovals, and I just think that's where that program's at. I don't think anybody in that car could win, but I do love seeing AJ Allmendinger in the Cup Series, and it's great to see someone win a race and show that kind of emotion. These things are hard to win, and I was happy to see AJ get her done.
Give you a hat tip. You called Ty Gibbs, said he was going to be very relevant in the overall calculus in terms of a guy that could compete for a podium finish. Top 5, top 10 was, the expectation at least of a floor. He goes out there and executes. And look, the 54 car, I think we're seeing come of age right before our very eyes. And you have to be pretty optimistic about what Ty Gibbs may be able to accomplish in his sophomore season in the Cup Series.
I think he wins next year. I think that it might be a road course. I think that's probably his best chance to get a win. Haven't quite seen him mix it up there on ovals yet, but man, he really is solid on these road courses. I almost thought he was going to get it done for us. I mean, full disclosure, Todd and I did have a piece of Ty at 25-1, which is crazy. I think he was like 20-1, like on Wednesday, qualifies well and looked great in practice. And then we were able to get him at 25-1. So I thought we were stealing a little bit there. He did take the lead on one restart for about half a lap, but AJ was just too aggressive. And by the way, if Ty were to get the lead, it was so hard to run the leaders down that I do think that Ty could have, if it had stayed green, Ty would have had a chance to win the race. But AJ knew he had to be ultra aggressive, and I think that was just the veteran AJ taking advantage of a Ty Gibbs that was probably a little bit nervous to be out front with, I don't know what it was, 7 or 8 laps to go when he took the lead. And then there was another caution. So I think Ty has a ton of upside. Right now, I think it's on road courses. I don't think it's on ovals, but we'll see what happens come next year.
Yeah, I don't think Ty was going to put the bumper to AJ. Could have gotten a little bit choppy out there, but it would have been one hell of a situation to see unfold if we did get the 54 and the 16 mixing it up on a late race restart, or if they were bumper to bumper with 1 lap to go.
Well, the interesting thing is you had Kyle Busch up there too.
Well, Kyle would have done whatever he needed.
Kyle was going to do everything. So
he would have cleared them all out of the way.
You had 3 people that were not going to give an inch, right? And then you had William Byron. So the first 4 drivers were like, "Hey, we're going for checkers or wreckers. We don't really give a shit."
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I knew that, AJ kind of took the outside, which I feel like is a kind of a cocky thing to do at the oval or the Roval. And then Ty Gibbs gets a jump, and I'm like, dude, Ty Gibbs is not going to back down. I thought that it was going to come down to AJ wrecking him or Ty putting a bumper to AJ. But then Kyle Busch is just licking his chops back there in 3rd place. Like, oh, please, would you guys, touch? Because then that changes the whole playoff perspective. I still get to talk about Kyle Busch, but instead, that's not what happened. I did think it was very interesting that, this is probably something to take a note for next season. The people that were racing for the win, I did not feel like were the best cars at the Roval, but they all had nothing to lose. And yeah. I think that's important to take into next year. That way we know when we're looking at this outright market that we're focusing in on guys that have nothing to lose, that keep their track position all the day by undercutting stages and just giving themselves an opportunity to win. So we'll try to carry that over to next year and see if that'll apply.
I mean, look, you have to show that level of aggression, and knowing how unruly the next year's playoff situation could potentially get. I'm just trying to think of the right adjective to use to describe it. Unpredictable, obviously, the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
That the handicapping methodologies that we've grown accustomed to using may be slightly different. But we'll wave the green, white checkered flag and put a bow on the Roval. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Worm, like we said we would do at the top of the show, stage 2, all about updating the odds to win the championship. And when we handicap the trio of tracks, it's Las Vegas, 1.5 miles. It's Homestead, 1.5 miles with very high tire wear, and the short track of Martinsville. So when we look at the prices throughout the market, this isn't exactly every single book. So as always, do shop around. Kyle Larson sees his number right around 4-1. Denny Hamlin at 9-2. William Byron at 9-2. Martin Truex at 5-1. All 4 of those drivers, 15-plus points clear of the cut line. And that's where things start to get a little bit more interesting with Tyler Reddick at 8-1. He's got to make up an 8-point gap. Christopher Bell at 10-1 also has to make up 8 points. Ryan Blaney at 10-1. He's 10 points down. And Chris Buescher at 10-1. Only 3 points down, but we haven't heard or spoken about the 17 much since its late season flourish. So when you look at the way these 3 tracks lay out, low-hanging fruit here to say it's HMS, JGR, and everybody else trying to fight for a piece of the pie to get to Phoenix?
Yeah, I do. I think that if I'm going to go through each driver individually, and then I kind of have this, macro look that I want to take a look at. I think that the favorite in Kyle Larson's right. And, I think that that's because of one particular track and Homestead. I think that he has a clear advantage there. And also, arguably the best car at Las Vegas. We'll get more into that in a minute. I think the favorite is right. And in having speed and just, I know that he had a rough last 3 races. Nothing heroic out of him at all. 31st at Texas, 15th at Talladega, 13th at the Roval. But they actually knew exactly what they had to do. And I think they executed quite well. It's really hard under that kind of pressure to execute at a high level. And they did a great job of it. And Kyle put him in a major hole when it comes to hitting the wall at practice on Saturday and then going to a backup car, starting in the rear. So I think that team did a phenomenal job. We look at Denny Hamlin. If there's someone that's just so competitive week in and week out, it's Denny. He might not look good in practice. He might not qualify well, but I'll be damned if with 100 to go in any track, Denny's up there in the top 5 mixing it up and feeling like he's got a good car. So I think that team is just – Denny's such a competitor. He just figures out a way to get it done, whether his car is good. If his car is good, he's going to go out there and lead a ton of laps. If his car isn't that great, he's still going to figure out a way to run top 3. So he's just kind of a gamer when it comes to that. William Byron's just been mistake-free. They have a ton of speed. I think they're a little bit behind on the speed of the 5 team and Kyle Larson, but they've just minimized mistakes much better. They put together entire weekends better than this 5 team. Larson will slip up. He'll make a mistake. And William Byron's also been really opportunistic late in races. He just finds himself restarting on the first couple rows and is able to get it done. So I do think that William, and also a great car at Phoenix. And I think that that's really important. When it comes to Denny Hamlin, to go back a second, Denny is not that great at Phoenix relative to Larson, Byron, Truex, and even Reddick for that matter. So I think that's where Hamlin's going to struggle. But if you get him in the Final 4, all the resources from JGR focus there, I imagine Denny Hamlin can be a top 3 car. Martin Truex Jr., I think that this is an important race for him. I mean, Las Vegas is a 1.5 mile track where I think that this 19 has flexed most of their muscles on the entire season, but not much. He hasn't shown us much in the last few races when it comes to the playoffs. I mean, if you just look at 18th, 36th, 19th, 17th, 18th, 20th, I mean, it's a very important that he was good all season, because otherwise he'd be outside the playoffs in the outside looking in. When it comes to Tyler Reddick, he's a high beta guy. He's a guy that could go out there and win a race, or he could make a mistake and finish 25th. So I do think that Homestead's a great track for him. Vegas, he was kind of behind the 8 ball, blowing an engine early in the weekend. Didn't have any practice, but was able to work his way up through the field, and I thought was a top 5 race car. When it comes to Chris Bell, I just have, I don't know. I think he hasn't been the fastest car in a long time, whereas I feel like a few times last year, Chris Bell was the fastest. I'm not quite sure about Chris Bell, and the mistakes have been there. I don't know. I don't know what to think about him. When it comes to Ryan Blaney, he's lucky to be here, in my opinion.
What, you mean having one finish when we get to him in a little bit inside the top 9 over the last 17 races is indicative of the kind of credentials you expect from a champion?
You want to talk about like just pulling a rabbit out of a hat. I mean, that's what he did at Talladega, but he's great there. So
yep.
in super speedway racing is a part of our sport, and it's important to be good at those places. So if someone just is writing off those races, well, you better figure it out, because we got 2 next year in the playoffs. So those are going to be really important to the success of any race team next year. And then it comes to Chris Buescher. He's kind of disappeared a little bit the last couple of weeks, 7th at the Roval, which I think everyone kind of anticipated, but you go back to Talladega in Texas, 15th or 19th and 14th. Bristol was a good finish, had a mistake in Kansas, but obviously, this team is just consistent. So that's my individual outlook on those 8 drivers. When I take a macro look, I think that Larson, Hamlin, Byron, and Truex should advance if they just kind of run how they've run all year. But this is NASCAR. This isn't, something where remember, they can re-rack. You could have a 10-second lead, you get a caution with 3 to go, and you find yourself, next to a driver that's been 10 seconds behind you all day. So here's my thought. If 3 of those 4 drivers, Larson, Hamlin, Byron, and Truex, are going to make it through, if one of them doesn't make it through and it's because another driver is won, I think that driver is Tyler Reddick, whether it's at Vegas or it's at Homestead. I don't know that he has a chance at Martinsville, but I'm not going to say never. If there's someone that's just consistent, that tends to just get the finishes and stays out of trouble, and that means that Larson, Hamlin, Byron, or Truex has found trouble, I think that Chris Buescher could sneak in. He's just been under the radar all year, constantly underestimated. And you know what? He was able to win a race at Michigan where I didn't even realize he was a top 5 car, and he held off Martin Truex Jr., arguably the fastest car I've ever seen in my life. So that's kind of my take. I think if not all 4 of those guys get in, those favorites, and it's because of win, it's because of Tyler Reddick. And if it's because of points, it's because of Chris Buescher.
Hey, look, I mean, when you get down to 8 drivers vying for 4 spots and 3 automatic berths on the line for any driver that can win his way in, It makes it extremely difficult to rely on points. And if you happen to get one driver that can win multiple races, it puts everybody else behind the 8 ball. So this is the time of year where you have to have more speed. And unfortunately, for some of these playoff drivers, you're not given a mulligan, regardless of what you were able to do. We know what the standings look like for Kyle Larson to be a couple points clear. We know what the standings look like for William Byron, Martin Truex Jr., and Denny Hamlin. But all it takes is one bad race and an early wreck, and suddenly, you're fishing in the wrong lake to try and get yourself into the playoffs where you need to be.
Well, you just can't make mistakes. And what you can't have is especially what happened to Truex at Kansas, where he didn't get any stage points and finished dead last. I mean, that's a death sentence. I mean, you have to go win a race now. I guess if there's one guy that could get away with it, it'd be William Byron, but not if Tyler Reddick goes out there and wins a race, or Chris Bell for that matter. So you just can't make mistakes. It rewards perfect racing, and you can sit back and look at the old Winston Cup standings, but I'll tell you what, this is a hell of a lot more entertaining on a week in, week out basis. I might not like
that's
to
what
bet.
That's what NASCAR is looking for first and foremost.
Oh, I've never been so glued to races where I haven't bet. Now, I do have skin in the game in my futures, but I wish the playoffs kind of stayed similar to this year, because I do think it gets a little gimmicky, more of a lottery next year. So we'll enjoy this while we have it, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting to Las Vegas. I think it's going to tell a lot about what these next 4 races are going to. Vegas would be a great indication, because last year, if you look at, remember Chase Elliott, we thought he was kind of the favorite to win the chase, and he goes out there and runs straight up 22nd or whatever he ran last year at Vegas, and we go, oh, this guy can't win, and he wasn't even he disappeared at Martinsville and also disappeared at Homestead. So I could see if there's a driver to do that, it might be Martin Truex Jr., but I just doubt it. There was too much speed on 1.5 miles all year long. I think he'll be competitive.
We'll find out. This is where rubber meets the road, and obviously some of the betting opportunity that's there, you may want to wait before you try and jump in and add additional positions to your portfolio based on how the first race plays out in Vegas, and we see some opportunity. But as always, we'll refresh next week when we know which driver, theoretically, if it's a playoff driver, will have already sealed his deal to get to Phoenix. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, as we go to stage 3 with the drivers to watch portion of the program, look, Vegas is a 1.5 mile track. We know exactly what we're getting here more often than not. The question that I always start with when I look at other comps, suffice to say, Vegas 1, Kansas 1 and 2, and Charlotte are the main data points that you're looking to try and get a comparable baseline for the drivers you're going to be focusing on this weekend?
Yep. Those 5 races. I think that that's just very fair. Some people could include Darlington, but I just think there's too much fall off at Darlington. I think that it's a little bit too narrow of a track to include that. So both Kansas races, Las Vegas, Charlotte, and Tech. I guess some Texas, that just kind of shows you where the speed's at. But when you look at Texas, just know that there are guys that just got loose and wrecked and had some poor finishes. So
yeah, I'm not using Texas for much of anything. I don't think that track is illustrative of how other drivers are going to perform. It may be the same distance, but I don't think that's a meaningful data point whatsoever. When we look at the odds to win at Vegas this weekend, we can start with the favorite, that being Kyle Larson, whose worst 3 finishes of the entire postseason came in the last 3 races. Exactly like we said, survived that round, and the final 4 races set up well for his driving talents. 13th place finish to the Roval, though, however, was not indicative of the car he had. He started from the back, wasn't able to qualify. And who knows, if he started inside the top 10, probably could have had a much better finish on his resume. When you look at Larson this year at 1.5 mile tracks, the 30th place finish he put forth in the 600 distorts his average finish on the track comps. 2nd in Vegas in the spring, 2nd at Kansas, and 4th at Kansas. And the bottom line is this: William Byron won at the intermediate tracks in Texas and Las Vegas, but Kyle Larson led the 2nd most laps in both races. At Las Vegas in the spring, Larson was cruising for the win, but a caution on lap 264 cost him the victory. Kyle Larson at 5-1. I imagine he's got to be part of everyone's portfolio.
Yeah, here's the other thing with Larson is he opens up the favorite like this, every week, especially on 1.5 mile tracks or 2 mile tracks. He opens at 5-1. And he typically practices really well. And usually that's every analyst is talking about how fast he was in the short run, the long run. And you find yourself, they find him reopening at 4-1 after practice. So I'm not going to be upset with anybody for taking Kyle Larson at 5-1, just because he's going to be there. He's not going to disappear. He very rarely has spent a lot of time in, running 9th or 10th at these 1.5 mile tracks. If you look at, if we take out Texas, his finishes are 2nd, 30th, and 4th. So obviously you take away that 30th. I'm pretty sure that was at Charlotte, which he was terrible at. And by the way, I did a double take because I have all the stats up for 1.5 mile tracks this year.
Yep.
And it says Ryan Blaney has won one of those. And I'm like, wait, when the hell? I forgot at Charlotte.
He won the 600.
Beat the brakes off everybody.
And he did. Well, William Byron was in the first pit stall. He made about 6 positions every time they had pit stops. And I realized that unless I got fresh tires with a late race restart, I had no chance for the 24 to try and go out there and actually cash a ticket for me.
That just goes to show you how Ryan Blaney's just been under the radar this year. I was at the race and forgot he won. I had to look up which race he won.
I mean, that race started on Sunday, went into Monday. I feel like you left, got on a flight or whatever the hell you had to do.
But either way,
I'm glad you're paying attention.
Ryan Blaney went out there and was the dominant car. I know we're not talking about him yet, but I just had to do a double take at this going, wait, when did Ryan Blaney win? Do I have the right stats pulled up? But either way, if you have Kyle Larson and you're like, hey, I'm going to ride Kyle Larson at 5-1, I don't see his price going to 6 or 7. I don't even know what he could do. Even if he goes to a backup car and starts in the rear, I don't see him going to 6 or 7-1. So
yeah, it's not going to drift that far out. So Kyle Larson there, probably one of the better numbers you'll get during the week. William Byron, similar mindset, I would imagine, 6-1-ish. Enters the round of 8 after finishing no worse than 2nd in the round of 12. 3 straight podium finishes during the most unpredictable round of the playoffs. When you look at the comp tracks for the 24 this year, 1st at Vegas, 3rd at Kansas, 2nd at Charlotte, 15th at Kansas. And as far as his Vegas history, 11 starts here, 4 top 10 finishes, 2 top 5s, and 1 win coming in March of 2023. William Byron at 6-1. We know HMS has shown speed in the 24, clearly going to be in the mix come Sunday.
He's just been mistake-free. He's been mistake-free with a pit crew that's been a weapon. You take those two things and you have speed and mistake free and a pit crew that's a weapon. That's how you end up with 6 wins. I can't think of any other way to do it, because if you're missing one of those 3 things, you can't win 4 or 5 times. They've just done a great job of putting entire races together. Even if you look at the Roval, I did not think that he was going to have a great car. He was probably like an 8th or 9th place car, but opportunistic, super aggressive on their strategy. He finds himself in the top 5. I think you just have to give this team a ton of credit. They have put together what looks like a championship season based on what they've done, and whether they can actually make it happen down the stretch. Hopefully they don't find all of their, kind of, I guess, unlucky races here in the next few. But the only thing I'll say about William Byron is I could see his price drifting. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think that getting in at 6-1 is a great idea, because I don't know where that price is headed. Even if he pulls it and looks good in practice, his teammate's going to look damn good. And I just can't imagine 6-1 becoming 4-1 or 5-1, even at that. And if so, he's going to have to look so much better than the field. It's probably worth playing. So I would just wait on this 6-1 price. It's so short. This is the hard part about this point in the season. I mean, you could probably just bet Larson, Byron, Hamlin. You're probably good. All of those guys are going to be up there. So this is when it gets hard, and it's just a matter of who is marginally better. And at this point, I can't see Byron being. I just can't see him being so much better that his price is reduced at all from that 6-1.
All right, well, speaking of another driver at 6-1, we may as well go to the 11 car of Denny Hamlin, who scored 4 straight top 5 finishes in this season's playoffs before a crash at the Roval last weekend had him placed 37th. As far as his mile-and-a-half performances, 11th at Vegas, 1st at Kansas, 35th at Charlotte, 2nd at Kansas 2. Denny said on his podcast earlier this week that he doesn't always practice well here, but this is a similar track for him to Kansas, that people basically shouldn't pay attention to how he unloads in any aspect of it. Track history for Denny at Vegas: 11 top 10 finishes in 23 Cup starts. He won the playoff race here in 2021 and finished 11th in this spring's race that we mentioned. He's led at least 121 laps at Las Vegas in races in 2020 and 2021. The 11 has truly become a model of consistency.
No, and he's a competitor. I mean, I fully expect Denny to be competitive. Again, I don't see him going off at less than that 6-1 price. So I would go ahead and wait there. He's also a guy that's just made a lot of mistakes on pit road, whether it's speeding, it's a loose tire. So again, Denny's going to be there. But at 6-1, I think you wait. I think that there's plenty of opportunity to get invested in Denny at even a higher price, whether you wait till after practice and qualifying. He's going to be there. I don't care if he qualifies 15th and says his car is a 3-legged donkey like he has in the past. He's still going to be good. And I expect him to go off in probably that 6 to 8-1 range. So since I can't see his price going down that much, I'm going to go ahead and wait.
All right. Well, we'll see what we have from.
It doesn't
Denny
mean
Hamlin.
Maybe there's not some value on some of these other, top 10, top 5, or top 3 prices on Denny.
There are always multiple ways to try and attack the board, no doubt about it. Denny's teammate, Martin Truex Jr., we talked a little bit about his trials and tribulations so far this postseason. Doesn't have a finish better than 17th through the first 6 playoff races. His average finish over the last 7 races is nearly 22nd. Hasn't seen a stretch on the calendar even close to what he's done lately. And obviously, he's got the worst average finish of any of the remaining playoff drivers. Vegas, though, he does have 2 career wins, but you have to go all the way back to 2019 to find the last time that the 19 car Martin Truex Jr. has reached victory lane. Martin Truex, 8-1. I know where I stand on this price, Worm. I've seen nothing that makes me want to run to the window and bet him until I see a little bit of speed.
Absolutely. Look at his playoff finishes: 24th, 18th, 36th, 19th, 17th, 18th, and 20th. And I mean, if Kyle Busch gets a decent restart last week, this guy's not even around. Now, here's I'm going to play a little devil's advocate. There's a reason he was able to have those finishes, and he's still moving on to the next round. And, oh, by the way, he's second in points, and that's because he beat the brakes off of everybody in the middle of the season. And that includes some 1.5-mile tracks. But I still think that This is a big race. If he goes out there and his, let's just say he qualifies 8th and finishes 11th and never kind of cracks the top 5, that's an uphill battle. I mean, I still think that this track, even though it's very different from Homestead and very different from Martinsville, it kind of shows you who has speed in the race car. There's not a ton of off throttle time. So I think that this is a great test for where the race cars are at. Then you put the car a little bit more in the driver's hands at Homestead with the tire wear. And then obviously Martinsville, once you get past 40 or 50 laps, we're going to see a ton of tire wear. And I think that you see the cream rise to the top. This is a big race for Martin Truex Jr. I could see him, if he looks good in practice, go off at 6-1, in which case 8-1 is a great price. But also I could see him, kind of speechless for the lack of speed and then end up going off at 13 or 14-1. And because of that, that's why I'm just going to be on the sidelines with Truex. I'd rather see him practice and see how his car is handling and how they unload before I get involved at 8-1. That 8-1 could be 6-1 or it could be 12-1 come Sunday. It all depends on how they unload.
Hey, I mean, if we talk about drivers at a price of 8-1, I mean, Tyler Reddick falls into that bucket. He's 7th in the standings, now 8 points below the cut line. Ended a 3-race run of 15th or worst place finishes with a T6 at the Roval. 15th at Vegas, 9th at Kansas, 5th at Charlotte, 1st at Kansas. Trend line has obviously been improving all season long at 1.5-mile tracks. And he's done okay at Vegas in the past. So when we look at Tyler Reddick, we know Toyotas have had speed. The 45 doesn't appear to be much of an exception.
Yeah, in a very impressive race out of him earlier in the season. I think he had to go to the rear. I think it was an engine. He didn't run one lap in practice, had an issue. No one knew what to expect. I know he went off at like 30-1, which is crazy to think about that. I obviously cannot see him going off at 30-1. But again, I do not see I see just more downside risk on him at 8-1. I can't imagine that he's going to go off at 7 or 6-1. And if he does, he's going to have a car that's probably indicative of that price. Right now, I think there's a better chance that he goes off at higher than 8-1 than lower than 8-1. And if he goes off lower just based on qualifying, then I'm going to fade him because I do think that there are other drivers that have been, I guess, faster on 1.5 miles. That being said, it's still Tyler Reddick. And if there's one guy I think that can go out here and surprise this top 4 with a win, it is him. But he's going to have to keep the mistakes to a minimum. And he was able to do that, in the playoffs and get a win. But he also gave away a couple races late in the season at Richmond and Michigan with mistakes. So, he's still a young driver that has the ability to run some amazingly fast lap times, but also make some boneheaded mistakes. So 8-1, not super excited about, but he could certainly go out there and win. And I think he's not going to sneak up on anybody. So if he looks good in practice, his price will probably stay the same. It would be my guess. And we'll be able to get in on that same price at 8-1.
A fair assessment. When we stick in the Toyota camp, Christopher Bell, the other JGR driver that we haven't touched on, enters the round of 8th, 6th in the standings and 8 points below the cut line, 5th at Vegas, 36th at Kansas, 24th at Charlotte, 8th at Kansas. Hasn't exactly been at his best at this track type so far this season. And when you look at how he's performed at Vegas, look, this probably has been one of his worst tracks for a driver that you expect to consistently show speed when you're going to races of this particular distance.
Yeah, I thought I had a way better feel on this guy last year. I thought that he was kind of a gamer and at times would have the fastest car at a certain point in every race. This year, been pretty much consistently a 4th to 9th place car at every single race, even at the race he won at Bristol Dirt. So not the same kind of speed out of this 20 car. I thought that Adam Stevens called a great race last week. Him pitting stage 1, I thought, what an idiot for about 10 seconds. And I thought, wow, Adam Stevens is playing chess and everyone else is playing checkers. But I still don't think that the car has been there. I think that Chris Bell's a very talented driver that could absolutely get it done, but you're only as good as your car. And that car has been consistently a 4th to 9th place car. You sprinkle some mistakes in there, and I'm not interested in Chris Bell. Now, could he go out there and pull it? Yes, but he's pulled it many times and hasn't been able to win the race. So, he's got to keep the mistakes to a minimum. If you look at Vegas, he was a 5th place car, but probably more like a 6th place car. And then 36 at Kansas, 24th at Charlotte, 8th at Kansas too. I don't know. I feel like he's going to be a 4th to 9th place car. And
I mean, look, I'll be honest here. If he goes out there and pulls it and we see his odds shrink in that 5.5 or 6 to 1 range, like odds makers have done a number of times, I'd love to be able to fade him against some of the elite drivers at the top of the board. It's just a question of what matchups we'll get. And if you can bet a Kyle Larson, a Denny Hamlin, or a William Byron against the 20 of Christopher Bell. Rounding out the field of 8, you have a pair of Ford drivers, Ryan Blaney at 14 to 1, Chris Buescher with a very similar price. When we look at Blaney, he's got some work to do. You mentioned the win at Charlotte, but that's his only finish at a 1.5 mile track inside the top 10. He's finished 13th or worse in 3 straight races at Las Vegas while leading a grand total of 49 laps. Meanwhile, Chris Buescher, look, I don't want to use his history at 1.5 mile tracks or even how he's performed at Vegas because we know RFK didn't have the program that they have right now. So I think some of those older data points, not indicative of what we're going to see from the 17. So when you look at these two drivers that clearly have plenty of work to do, how do you go about assessing the handicap in terms of buying or selling prospects?
Let's talk about Ryan Blaney. If we go back to 2022, I thought that the Fords were extremely fast at Las Vegas and also at Phoenix. Now, this year, I went back and looked at practice times and what my expectations were for the race at Las Vegas. And I was very high on Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano. And both of them, after about 10 laps, fell off massively. And they were lucky to get the finishes that they had. Well, not Logano. Obviously, he wrecked out. But Ryan Blaney, he couldn't keep the car on the track. I think whether he was fighting a loose condition or a tight condition, when I went back and watched the race, there was a lot of yelling that was going on the radio. It's really hard for me to get behind a car two cars or Fords in general that qualified so well, but had trouble hanging on. And I'm not talking about specifically Ryan Blaney. I think Ryan Blaney struggles with tire wear, but Joey Logano does not. And he dropped like a rock. So there's been nothing over the last few races that has said to me that Ford has all of a sudden found something and they're going to be fast. Ryan Blaney won at a super speedway, but to continue that point with Ford, Chris Buescher hasn't been that great either. I mean, he had a good finish at Bristol, but he also won Bristol last year and he ended up finishing 4th this year. So obviously Bristol's a very comfortable track for him, but you look at the Roval finish, that was obviously really solid with a 7th place finish, but then you go back to Darlington as a 3rd place finish. So, I think that Chris Buescher is going to run kind of right around 7th, 8th, 9th place all day. I think Ryan Blaney would be happy to run in the top 10. And for those two reasons, I just don't think they can win the race. I think that there are other drivers at higher odds that have a better chance at winning the race than Chris Buescher and Ryan Blaney. I think that they're going to be very conservative. And if one of the top 4 guys makes a mistake, I think they'll be happy just picking up points and moving on to Homestead. So I think they both have an uphill battle. I think that Chris Buescher has, I think he'll kind of run anywhere from 8th to 12th. I think Ryan Blaney does have a chance to potentially run top 5, but on that same breath, he also has a chance to run outside the top 15. So I don't trust either of these guys right now to win the race. After practicing qualifying, I would be interested in maybe some top 5, top 10s or some matchups, but winning the race is not something I think on either of their radars at this point.
Well, you mentioned drivers with longer odds. For guys that are outside of the playoff race that could still crash the party, are there a couple that you have your eye on in terms of handicapping this weekend's race?
Well, you just look at some of the guys at really high odds. It's Joey Logano at 40 to 1. I mean, he put it on the poll earlier this year, and whether you had a good car or not, you give Joey Logano the first pit stall starting up front. Paul Wolfe. I mean, that's not a bad idea. I haven't played anything yet from an outright perspective. I do think that Alex Bowman at that 30 to 1 price, he's been really sporty here the last couple of years at Vegas. And he's a guy that on a late race restart gets it done. So I'm not sure how I feel about someone like Kevin Harvick. they haven't shown race winning speed, but I'll tell you what, they did at Darlington. And if they don't make that mistake, or there's not that weird, funky caution with him going on pit road, does he win that race or not? And how much does that change the playoffs? I mean, if we're sitting here and Kevin Harvick, let's say he wins Darlington and he's able to, it's hard to say, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but if Kevin Harvick's still in the playoffs at this point, you're not going to see him at 40-1. That's for damn sure. So for someone that doesn't necessarily practice or qualify well, he always finds himself just kind of creeping around the top 5. And oh, look, with, on the final restart, Kevin Harvick starting on outside of row 2 with a chance to win the race. So I think that there's some value there. I'm not sure if Ty Gibbs at that 30-1 price is worth playing. I don't think he's quite there on ovals, but I like a lot of those prices a hell of a lot more than I like that Chris Buescher and Ryan Blaney at that 14-1 price for sure.
I think it makes a ton of sense. Look, we know that playoff drivers typically have a knack for being in the thick of things, but it doesn't mean that they have to win all of these races. So there's no reason just because they are a playoff driver that you should be taking short numbers that you wouldn't take if this was the same race during the spring. So keep that in mind. Obviously, make informed decisions. No reason to make irrational choices and irresponsible decisions when it comes to the final 4 races of the campaign. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the Stay Green podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, don't call it a heater yet. A 1-race winning streak for best bets for us, but it came on Ty Gibbs at plus $1.10. How are we keeping this mojo going? Because we can finish with 5 in a row.
Oh, we're staying super chalky, Todd. So I'm going to take, it says at Bet Rivers. In some Canby sites, I don't even know if Barstool is super reliable anymore. I don't know how many, if they offer this price, but we're going to go with Denny Hamlin, top 5 at even money. Here's why. I think that if there's one guy that it doesn't matter where he qualifies or where he practices, he finishes in the top 5, it's Denny Hamlin. He has been the model of consistency. Unfortunately, I don't have a future on him to win the championship. It just kind of feels like Denny's year, in my opinion, for whatever it feels like is worth.
Don't tell that to Jeff Gordon.
I know. Well, Jeff
is always welcome on this podcast if he's out there listening, is what you mean.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm about to say. But I feel like he needs to get his head out of the sand. Like you telling me you don't want your driver like Denny Hamlin. And by the way, if I've a couple of times I've tweeted that Denny Hamlin is the most important driver, most influential driver in NASCAR. Ooh, does that get some mentions? People are just irate at that comment, and they think that I'm like a Denny Hamlin apologist. Like, no. Denny has a podcast where he speaks his mind and is incredibly honest. By the way, for what he said on his podcast, he was actually docked points. Like,
which, if you look at it right now, imagine if it comes down to it at the end, which it won't now at this point with the playoffs resetting. But if it did, it would have been one hell of a storyline for something like that. Of course.
I just think he has the voice. He's the voice of the drivers. I don't care what anyone says. He's also a co-owner of a race team. He's got his hand in a ton of different things where a lot of these other drivers, Kyle Larson's not the most important driver in NASCAR. He might be really popular, but he's important to the Indy 500 where he's running tomorrow or today, depending on when the podcast comes out. He's got the rookie thing going on at Indy. And I don't know. I've become a Denny fan, not because I like what comes out of his mouth. I just like the fact that a lot of the stuff that comes out of his mouth is not easy for him to say. And he's the only one saying it. So if I were to say anything about Denny Hamlin, I try to say a nice thing about every driver. I kind of like watching Denny Hamlin win because he gets the boos. I like Kyle when he used to do the little cry face. I like the same thing with Denny, and he's really important to NASCAR in the future of the sport. I think that he's going to be top 5, for the next 3 races. I think that we're getting a good price at even money. Even if he qualifies outside the top 12, I still think that, 100 laps to go in this race, Denny's going to be vying for the lead.
No, it makes sense. Look, this time of year, there's nothing wrong oftentimes with, having a relatively chalky portfolio, knowing those guys are going to do everything it takes and then some to keep themselves in contention for good race days. As always, if you're looking for more race day coverage, you can follow Chris. He does the pre-race poll on Sundays. What time are you scheduled for this week?
Let's see. The race goes at what, 12:50? So, well, I don't even know what time the race goes. It's an hour and a half before the race. Geez, Todd, don't ask me all these difficult questions.
I mean, look, the questions get harder as we go along. I'm glad to know you're in mid-season form when you're trying to win a championship, Worm. So
yeah, well,
it warms my heart that you're on top of this as always.
Well, you know me. Yeah, it's 2:30, so it'll be 11:30, so it'll be 10 a.m. my time. So 10 a.m. Pacific.
Final answer?
1 p.m. Eastern will be 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m., 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Pacific time.
It's getting late here, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's really late as we record on a Wednesday night. It's about 7:15 in the PM, so it's past Chris's bedtime. But best of luck to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. Only 4 races to go before we crown a champion, but plenty of money to be made between now and then. And most importantly, with a Denny Hamlin top 5 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.